Chapter 30. Food sizzled in the cookpot as Link sat by it, poking at the mixture with a critical eye. Something was missing. He could tell just by looking at it. The consistency seemed right, but something about the coloring bothered him. What was it? Rabbit meat? Rice? Some carrots and herbs? Tapping his chin thoughtfully, Link turned and rummaged through the saddlebag that he had pulled off of Spirit's saddle. This was rapidly becoming his cooking pack, as he kept most of his ingredients and foodstuffs in this one. He even started strapping the cookpot to it during travel. Might as well keep it all together. He pulled out a small glass jar full of red substance slightly coarser than powder. Goron spices. He unscrewed the lid and tapped some of the spice into the stew, stirring it in. Still not satisfied, he continued to tap and stir until finally, the color seemed right. Smiling, he screwed the lid back on and stowed the spice into the saddlebag. He lifted the wooden spoon to his lips and tasted the dish. It was spicy. Coughing as the spice hit the back of his throat, he used his water skin to wash it down, which only helped a small degree. However, for all of its heat, it had an excellent taste. So, that was good at least. Kass watched him curiously from across their small camp, his face lit by the warm fire. He was smiling. "You know," he said, finally, "I never imagined that you would be such an accomplished cook. That wasn't a quality ever spoken of in the songs and stories that my teacher told me." Link glanced up at Kass and shrugged, smiling. "I feel like it's one of those things just beginning to come back." He looked down at the dish. "I don't even know what this is. Can't remember its name." Kass laughed and Link's smile widened. It felt good to sit here in the warmth of the fire. They left Central Hyrule the day prior. After the Guardian chase, Link had activated the Sheikah Shrine, traveling into its depths and completing its trials. He was growing more adept at seeing the solutions that the Sheikah intended for him to take, as well as some alternate methods to skip portions of the shrine puzzles. Or perhaps they had intended on him finding such shortcuts, having positioned things just right to allow him to make more use of them. He had no idea what the designers intended. After the shrine, they continued west, crossing the bridge into North Hyrule, without being accosted by any more guardians or monsters. No Yiga ambush awaited them on the bridge, or that evening as they sat and lay quietly under a large overhang of a rock. As the next day dawned, both of their spirits lifted considerably, and they continued on their journey. Still making their way west, they passed through a deep canyon or gorge. The rock walls formed overhangs overhead that looked like sharp teeth, giving Link the impression that they were in the maw of some great beast. They encountered a group of monsters along the way, but Link dispatched them with relative ease. After that, the only other living things they spotted in the canyon were the occasional Keese that slept in caves or crevices. The road had forked at one point, with one branch traveling straight north and the other southwest. It had piqued Link's interest as he looked down the north road. He knew that he had traveled on it before, and he found that his memory refused to give up its secrets as to what the road held. Kass had offered to let him take the detour, but he decided otherwise. He could spend his whole life chasing down hidden memories, or he could continue on his mission. And for now, they seemed to still be a step ahead of the Yiga assassins. He wanted it to stay that way. They had finally made camp a short time after exiting the canyon. It wasn't that late yet, but Spirit was beginning to show signs of weariness. The long trek across the field had taken its toll on them all, and they were still barely halfway to their destination. Better to get rest while they could. They made camp in the shadow of a large tree-like plant that rose high on a thick trunk before its tops flared out in a flat-topped disc made of thick, interwoven wood and long green needles. Link had no memory of such trees, but Kass informed him that they were called serious dragonblood trees. So, why are they called dragonblood trees? Link asked after doling out a bowl of the stew to Kass and settling down on the ground to eat his own. He looked up, gazing at the canopy overhead. The sun had begun to set, and with it, the air had cooled noticeably. The climate here was cooler than it had been in the central region, despite the warmth of the late spring. He was thankful that they had decided it was safe to build a fire tonight. "That is actually a tale I would prefer not to tell you just yet," Kass said, smiling. At Link's curious expression, he continued, "You'll know soon enough." Link raised one of his eyebrows, now more curious than ever. Kass was usually very forthcoming with information. He didn't press the issue, however, trusting that Kass was being honest. Apparently, he would know soon enough. He lifted his first spoonful of the food to his lips, tasting it. His tongue burned with its spice, but it was deliciously savory at the same time, the rice having soaked up much of the meat and vegetable flavors. "I'm not sure if I've ever seen you look so content," Kass observed after a few moments of silence. He had begun eating his own food, and hadn't commented on its heat. The statement caught Link off guard, and he looked up from his dish, which he had already nearly finished. "Forgive my observation, but it seems to me that you thrive in this sort of environment. You often seem uncomfortable when surrounded by people, but out here you are happier, content." It was true enough, Link thought, as he stirred the food remaining in his bowl. He didn't relish being the center of attention. Crowds made him feel on edge, but it wasn't that he was some kind of recluse or loner. He enjoyed having friends. He felt better when traveling with a companion. "I don't mind people," he finally said. He had even enjoyed the celebrations in Goron City. They had lauded him as much as the Zora and the Sheikah had, yet he hadn't felt nearly as uncomfortable around them as he did around the others. Their attitude towards him had been different. Even as they celebrated his actions, they had also treated him like an equal, a brother. He was as likely to be cursed at by an old Goron he had disturbed, as he was to be clapped on the back by another. "I think I just don't like being placed on a pedestal to be cocked at." Kass nodded thoughtfully. "A difficult proposition, considering what you have set out to do." "That's what people keep telling me, and I'm getting used to it," Link sighed. "They may not like it, but it seems to help." "It gives the people hope," Kass supplied. Hope. Just like Imba had said. He thought to his blue champion's tunic, tucked away in Spirit's saddlebags. He hadn't worn it on this trip through Hyrule Field, and he didn't dare wear it now. Any Yiga they passed would surely know of it. "My friend, I know you do not wish to be held in such high regard, and I apologize for my own role in denying that wish. But you must understand that your presence signals a shift in our world. Not just the Zora and Gorons, each of whom you saved from terrible fates, but even those we met at the wetland stable." Link frowned. The day before traveling into Hyrule Field, they had met at the stable, remaining there for the night. There hadn't been many travelers there, though Link had recognized many of the same faces that he'd seen on his first stop there. Permanent residents, it seemed. "I don't understand," he said. But of course. You only saw them after I had been playing for a time," Kass nodded, considering. "Link, do you know why I love telling stories?" "Because you love imparting knowledge." "Yes, that is true, in part. But it is not the only reason." Kass set down his bowl and reached over, picking up his instrument case and undoing the series of latches on it. He opened the lid and lifted out his concertina, gazing down at it fondly. "You see, I have found that music and storytelling have an incredible effect on listeners' emotions, their hopes and dreams. A simple key change can affect the entire outcome of a story. I can tell a story of a brave knight facing down hordes of demons, eventually falling to his death before their overwhelming numbers." He played a long note, low and somber. "And the story can either be a tragedy, a tale of the woes of fighting the inevitable, or it can be a tale of bravery, honor, and sacrifice." He played another note, this one fuller and stronger. Link immediately felt a shift in his perception of the image in his mind. The first tone had projected a desperate feel. Hopeless. The other gave him a sense of a single man, standing tall and defiant, fighting to save the ones he loved. The end was the same in each case, yet so different. Which one had he been on that field, 100 years ago? The men and women of Hyrule often feel like that night to me, barely surviving. Monsters only seem to grow stronger by the day. The calamity rages more and more often, and now even nature itself seems to be in upheaval, thanks to the divine beasts. And for years, they have been like the first man, desperate and hopeless, awaiting the inevitable doom. But lately it seems to me that the residents of Hyrule are standing taller than before. No longer do they merely survive, but they want to fight back. I used to try to use my music and storytelling to accomplish such a shift in people's hearts, though it was often only a temporary change. Now I find that I don't have to as much. He looked up from his concertina, smiling warmly at Link. You've brought hope back into their lives, Link. You fought the very elements of nature and won with barely a scratch on you. You've traveled across half of the land, righting wrongs and saving lives. Yes, I have done a little to spread the tales of your victories, but I have only hastened the process. The land is changing for the first time in 100 years. It feels as though... Kass paused, considering, as he looked up towards the darkening sky. As though spring has arrived after a long winter. Huh. Link? Link looked at Kass, tearing his eyes away from the dancing flames under the cookpot. It's just that... That's what Impa wanted me to do. To give people hope. That's why she gave me the tunic and insisted that I not hide my mission. She has seen much. Likely she knows full well the power that hope can bring to a desperate people. I'm happy that I've been able to help. Link looked up. The sky had become a deep purple now. I want to see this land free from Ganon, Kass. I want to see new towns being built. I'm tired of seeing ruins everywhere. Have you spared any thought to what you will do after you defeat Ganon? He took a long time to reply. I don't really know. What does a wandering hero do when there is no longer any evil to fight? The land shall need leaders. What, like a king? Link looked back down at him, eyes opening with alarm. Not necessarily, though I have no doubt that some might whisper your name for such a role, after all you've done, and will do in the future. The thought sent a shiver down Link's spine. He thought of his little cottage in Hateno village, of cooking under the stars. He could have neither of those things, if he became a king. But there are other ways to lead than from a throne. Your memories hold key information, though you might not yet remember them. We have lost much knowledge of the old world since the calamity. Individuals such as yourself or Impa will be vital to the rebuilding effort. What knowledge could he bring, though? He knew how to fight, that was true. He could teach others swordplay. From what he had been told and seen in Zora's domain, he had even already done so in the past. Could he be a military leader? A general in a new Hyrulean army? A knight captain? Duty. That was what it came down to, wasn't it? Even if he accomplished everything that he set out to do, he would still do his duty, no matter where that took him. Briefly, he thought of the princess, and suddenly, he wondered what she would want to do, if he freed her. Surely she would become a queen. He thought of the memories that he had of her, her disdain for him notwithstanding. She always seemed more comfortable when in her traveling clothes than anything formal. Would she want the throne, if offered to her after so many years? Link felt as though he should know the answer to that question, yet he didn't think that he knew the princess as well as he thought he had before Death Mountain. After the memory at the Spring of Power and the subsequent conversation with her, he thought that he had a good sense of who she was, but now... People can change. Link frowned, shaking his head slightly. He was being unfair, and he knew it. There was no doubt in his mind that the memories he had begun to see since entering Death Mountain had come from before the Spring of Power. She had obviously changed. Their relationship had changed. And yet, he couldn't shake the look of her face when her father announced that Link would be her knight. Father, no. I can see that I have set your mind spinning, Kass intoned a few moments later, smiling sympathetically. I apologize. Of course, your focus should be on the now, rather than tomorrow. I merely cannot help myself but to wonder at what the future will bring. What kind of world our children will grow up in. Link shook his head, meeting the Rito's eyes and smiling. I'm alright. Just doing some wondering myself, I suppose. He tried to push the negative thoughts from his mind and moved closer to the fire, scooping out another bowl's worth of the dish. Suddenly his eyes widened. Curry. Kass looked up at him curiously. It's curry. Rabbit curry. Kass smiled broadly and lifted his bowl in a kind of toast. Link returned his smile, and he sat back down, steaming bowl of curry in hand. The next day's travels passed pleasantly. They passed by a location labeled as Hyrule Ridge on the Sheikah Slate. In the distance to the north, Link saw many more of the dragonblood trees, some growing dozens of feet tall with massive trunks. Black clouds had gathered over a large patch of them, sending rain and lightning down among the trees, and the storm did not appear to be in any hurry to move on. Thunder Plateau, Kass informed him, as they walked along the road. There is a perpetual thunderstorm over it. That has been there for as long as anyone can remember. I even know several stories of intrepid adventurers who have braved the storm while looking for treasure. It made Link think of divine beast Varuta and its strange control over the weather. He wondered if there was any Sheikah technology somehow behind the storm, but had little interest in trying to find out for himself, as he watched jagged lightning fork down to strike the ground. When they rested for the night, it was at another of the stables that he was growing familiar with throughout the land. This one had been placed right under a particularly large dragonblood tree that rose at least 50 feet in the air overhead. Like the other stables that he had encountered, this one seemed to have a small group of people that lived and worked in the area permanently. He wasn't quite sure how they remained viable, with how few travelers he saw on the roads, but Kass assured him that they got enough business on this side of Hyrule Field. Link hadn't been sure about staying at the stable, considering the Yiga threat, but he hadn't seen a way around it. Even if they moved on, whatever Yiga were at the stable would simply follow them and attack in the night. Perhaps this way, the presence of others would at least give them pause before attacking. Still, though, Link paid for a private room, which he shared with Kass. The door could not lock, so he and Kass slept in shifts, as they had been doing throughout their journey together. Nothing happened in the night, however, and the next morning Kass roused Link early, informing him that he wished to show him something. What is it? Link asked, as he tightened his belt before sitting on his bunk to slide his feet into his boots. You will see. Trust me. You will not want to miss it. Kass beamed at him before exiting the room. Link looked longingly to his bed. He'd been having a good dream, though he couldn't quite remember what it had been anymore. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep now that he was up, though, he stood and walked out into the stable's common room. It took him a moment to find Kass, who stood by one of the curtained entrances. He stepped towards the Rito, passing by a man sitting cross-legged on the floor, a small table set out before him. He appeared to be a merchant of sorts, as he had an assortment of items on the table, each meticulously placed and organized. There was a massive backpack on the floor beside him. When he saw Link looking at the table, the man grinned broadly at him. Hello there. He smiled politely at the man, but kept moving, walking out under the curtain that Kass held open for him. Once outside, they walked past a paddock containing a herd of goats and approached a long bridge that crossed the canyon that separated this region from the Tabantha region. He had caught sight of the bridge the night before when they arrived, but he hadn't noticed the large wind pumps that caught the wind and spun to face it. They stood tall on poles dozens of feet tall, their blades just barely emerging from the lip of the canyon. There were several of them spread throughout the canyon. A lazy breeze blew through the canyon, ruffling Link's hair and causing some of the fans to turn and face the breeze, their blades spinning. They reached the bridge and Kass held out a feathered hand to signal for Link to stop. He did so, and frowned at Kass, looking around. What were they here to see? Why had it been so imperative to get out here so quickly, and so early? Most of the tables of the residents had not yet emerged. Kass? The tall Rito shook his head, glancing down at Link. He held up one finger, and then looked back up at the canyon, where it snaked to the northeast. Just wait. Trust me. Link fell silent, waiting as Kass did, eyes searching the canyon. What were they waiting on? The wind picked up, catching more of the wind fans, causing them to slowly turn to face the same direction. Distantly, the first rays of sunlight emerged over the tops of the dragon-blood trees. Silence fell as the insects and birds all ceased their morning songs. The hairs on the back of Link's neck stood on end, and he looked around. Nothing made a noise, with the exception of the wind pumps, which continued to spin with the breeze. Abruptly, the breeze became a gale that howled down the canyon. All of the remaining fans spun, snapping into place, their blades spinning rapidly. Heavy wind chimes attached to the stable's gutters began to chime with a deep, sonorous sound. A red glow appeared from just around a bend in the canyon. Link took a step closer to the canyon's edge, frowning and gazing in the direction of the glow. What? Kass placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. Not too close. Something long and sinuous appeared from around the bend, its body undulating as it floated on the wind. It flew through the air like an eel swam through water. It had a long, scaly snout, topped with 2 serpentine horns, and a white mane of fur behind the horns. Its body was long and lithe, with several pairs of short legs, pointed spines along its back, and a long tail ending with even more of the spines positioned dangerously around it. Link gasped, eyes widening, as he looked at the enormous creature that seemed to fill the entire canyon with its presence. Dragon, he whispered, voice not audible over the gusting wind and tinkling of the wind chimes. The dragon flowed down the canyon, approaching the bridge, never changing its slow, purposeful pace. It flew with supernatural grace, its body rising and falling rhythmically. As it got closer, Link could see its horns and spines all glowed with a fiery orange light, and that it released small puffs of fire from its snout as it exhaled. The air grew noticeably warmer as the dragon approached. What is it? He asked, breathless. The dragon reached the bridge and flew under it, continuing its way down the canyon. Dinral, Kass said, watching the dragon pass with a smile. There are 3 dragons that inhabit this land. Dinral, Nadra, and Farosh. Kass inclined his head towards the red dragon. She inhabits the region near Death Mountain and Dakala, and travels through this canyon each morning. The other dragons who inhabit Mount Lanayru and the foreign marshlands, respectively, each follow similar patterns, though they tend to be less predictable. Din, Link said, watching as the dragon's tail passed under the bridge and out the other side. Nehru. Furore. Kass looked at him with some surprise. Yes, that is right. I'm surprised you knew that. Most appear to have forgotten the creation legend. I only know of it because of some of the ancient texts left to me by my teacher after he passed. He could see in his mind's eye large stone dragon's maw in the center of a thick jungle. Old, ancient, covered in moss, its teeth worn down to smooth, round nubs from the years. The inside was shadowy, but he could just make out the upper half of the statue of the Hylia within. The Spring of Courage. Princess Zelda was within, though he could not see her from his vantage, outside of the dragon's maw and at the bottom of a series of steps. Din, Nehru, Furore. Each of the 3 springs is aligned with one of the 3 ancient goddesses. Princess Zelda's voice blossomed in Link's mind. That is what she had told him before entering the spring. I will pray at each of them in hopes of unlocking my powers. She had been unsuccessful there, just as she had been at the Spring of Power. That just left. Kass, do you know where the Spring of Wisdom is? The songs speak of the 3 goddess springs, courage, wisdom, and power. The Spring of Wisdom is said to be to the northeast, but I do not know its exact location. I would likely place it within the Lanayru region. Perhaps on the mountain? Link nodded slowly, trying to focus his mind on the final spring. It held significance to him, but his memories of the place refused to surface. Had they never made it to the spring? Was that perhaps why he could remember nothing of it? Perhaps Ganon had returned prior to their trip to that final location. Perhaps that was why Princess Zelda's powers had not awakened until it was too late. Link, have you seen another memory? He shook his head, but then hesitated. Something like that. I'm still sorting through it. He met Kass's eyes. The dragon had rounded another bend in the canyon, disappearing from his view. I'll tell you about it once we get on the road. Kass nodded and they turned back to the stable to gather their things. Within the hour, they had packed up their gear and set out again with Link on Spirit's back, and Kass flying overhead to ensure the path ahead was safe. Link stared up at the cliff face before him, eyes searching out the handholds in its surface. While some places were less steep than others, there were also sections that were sheer and even slightly inverted. It would be a difficult climb alone, but with Kass's help, it should be simple enough. Only a little over an hour had passed since they had set out on the next leg of their journey before he had stopped them, calling Kass down. Link's eyes were fixed on a series of broken pillars atop the canyon wall that brought him a sense of familiarity as he looked at them. He'd been here before. When Kass told him that there was also a Sheikah shrine atop the cliff, it made up his mind. Just take this end of the rope and tie it onto one of the pillars, all right? He held one end of the rope out to Kass. He doubted the length of rope would be cut long enough to reach down to the ground, but it would be close enough. Kass took the rope, looping it over his chest, and then glanced around. After a moment's consideration, he began to run back the way they had come, spreading his wings and taking flight. He flew in a long arc, slowly gaining altitude until reaching the right height, landing on the ridge overhead. A minute later, the rope was flung down the side of the cliff. As expected, it did not quite reach down far enough for him to grasp from the ground. He approached the cliff face and rubbed his hands together, considering the wall before him. Finally, taking a breath, he began to climb. His fingers found the narrow ledges and crevices, and he made quick work, climbing the 20 feet to reach the dangling rope. Once he grasped it, the rest of the climb was much easier. When he crested the top, Link stood up straighter and looked around, taking in the sight. The ground leveled out here, though he could see that the ground sloped down the further west he went. On the side opposite of where Link climbed, it ended with a severe drop-off into the Tanagar Canyon, where the dragon had flown through earlier. Atop it was a series of large round columns and arches, most of which remained standing, despite their great age. Other structures dotted the ground, too, the remains of whatever old buildings once stood atop this plateau. All of the columns and buildings seemed to be pointing to and housing an ancient Sheikah shrine that shone with orange lights on its eastern end, near where Link stood. It had once been enshrined in a square of columns, but many of these had since collapsed or been torn down by the elements. He stepped towards the shrine, stepping onto the remains of an ancient stone path. The path was made up of stone tiles with elaborate designs carved into their surfaces. when he reached the shrine and stepped up into its base, he turned and looked around, eyes gazing over his surroundings. "I've been up here before," he said, frowning. It seemed painfully familiar to him, yet no memory was forthcoming. What had happened here? Kass opened his mouth, but he shook his head, concentrating. What is it about this place? He turned and looked up at the Sheikah symbols on the shrine, finding them off somehow. They weren't glowing the last time I was here, were they? That was it. The shrine had been inert, and Princess Zelda had... What? What was she doing? He grimaced, trying to remember, to recall what he was missing. But nothing surfaced. His memories remained as opaque as ever. After nearly a minute of silence, he finally shook his head. Nothing. He looked at Kass. I'm going to complete the shrine. Maybe I'll teleport back here later and figure it out. Link turned, unclipping the Sheikah slate from his belt, and approached the round pedestal, glowing with the orange Sheikah eye. He held the device out to it, but stopped before touching the smooth, glassy surface. She was here. Kneeling right here, trying to activate it. She was... angry. He gasped, as memory flooded in. She disappeared before he woke in the morning. Link probably shouldn't have felt as surprised as he did. This sort of thing was becoming quite a common occurrence for the Princess of Hyrule and her knight. She wasn't that far ahead of him, from what the residents at the Tabantha stable had told him, and he had a pretty good idea of where she had gone. They had finished their second visit to the Rito village since his becoming her knight. Rivali had sent her a letter 2 weeks prior, complaining that his divine beast was not as responsive as he thought it should. His suggestion, which had been full of his typical self-absorbed arrogance, was that Princess Zelda should come at once to see that his divine beast was fixed. He had expected the princess to decline, or at least to explain that it would have to wait until after the trip to the Gerudo Desert that they were planning on had concluded. After all, she had been speaking of this trip for the last several weeks, so his assumption was that she wouldn't want to risk postponing that. What he hadn't counted on, however, was her desperation to get out of the castle, even earlier than planned. I expect that you will have many preparations to conclude with, said Link, so I shall not require that you come with me on this trip. She had told him one evening. I shall allow you to finish your preparations and will instead travel with Purah and Robbie to Rito village. We shall be quite safe. She had barely given him time to reply, instead smiling curtly and turning, her blonde hair flaring out behind her as she walked purposefully away. The next morning, seeing her expression when she found Link waiting beside her white stallion, with his reddish mare, made the sleepless night full of last-minute preparations nearly worth it. Now, rather than going to Gerudo Desert in 2 weeks, they would instead travel to Rito village first, attend to Rivali's inability to solve his own problems, and then go straight south to the desert from there. Link was quite proud of his ability to make the plan come together, actually. Of course, he suspected that had been Princess Zelda's plan all along, but he said none of that to her. He had long since realized that the best thing he could do in her presence was remain silent. The trip to Rito village had gone well enough. Purah and Robbie hadn't actually traveled with them all the way there. They were, instead, on the way to the ancient tech lab. Link didn't ask the princess about that either. Once there, Link had allowed the princess and Rivali to go about their business without his interference. Rivali still wouldn't help him get up to the flying machine, and together, he and Princess Zelda set off for the Gerudo Desert ahead of schedule. On the way back through the wide canyon, before the Tabantha Bridge, she commented to herself about the ancient columns in the Rain Highlands, looking up at the old ruins from atop her horse. He had offered that they could ride up and look at them, but she refused. That likely should have been Link's first clue, that she would disappear on him. Link pushed his horse harder than he would normally have liked as he rounded the cliffs to where the land sloped up into the highlands, and eventually the plateau where the ancient columns rested. While the roads were still mostly safe, despite the increased monster presence in the nation as of late, this was a considerable distance off the beaten path, which did worry him. if the princess had gone and gotten herself into trouble. But no. As he climbed the hill and came within view of the pillars, he saw her horse standing placidly, grazing. He breathed a sigh of relief and slowed upon his approach. As he neared, he began to hear her quiet mumblings, and she spoke to herself. She came into view. Princess Zelda knelt beside one of the old Sheikah shrines, this one standing as inactive as all of the others that had been around the land. She leaned close, having opened a small panel in the round pedestal by what she claimed was the entrance, and fiddled with something inside of it. There must be a way to get this open. It is just like the Shrine of Resurrection, so why won't these work as that did? She closed the panel and stood up. After a moment, she hesitantly reached out with her Sheikah slate, placing it against the pedestal. Nothing happened. Her shoulders slumped, and she shook her head, sighing. It must be designed to wait for something, a signal of sorts, perhaps. She looked down at the device in her hands. But designs can always be worked around. I should be able to figure this out. The princess hesitated. At least I hope. Epona snorted loudly as Link brought his mount to a stop, and Princess Zelda's shoulders stiffened. He dismounted, and when he saw her again, she faced him, cheeks growing red. He saw irritation in her eyes. Ah, I see that you caught up, she said coolly. She gripped her Sheikah slate before her like a shield. I do believe that I made it clear that I am not in need of your escort every single place I go. You were not required to follow me here. I would have preferred that you remain behind at the stable to prepare our supplies for the next leg of our journey. Link remained silent, not daring to speak now. Her eyes were dangerous all of a sudden, and her cheeks grew even more flushed. She stared at him, though, waiting for several seconds before blowing out an irritated breath, placing her hands on her hips and looking away. It seems that I'm the only one here with a mind of my own. That stung, though Link tried to keep his face free of emotions. It would blow over. It always did. I, the person in question, am fine. She looked back at him, lips pursed, regardless of the king's orders. This wasn't good. She was only growing angrier, and if Link was honest with himself, he was too. He felt his cheeks beginning to flush, but he still kept his mouth clamped shut. Let it go. It's just her temper. She's frustrated. Her experiments didn't work. He didn't understand why she was prone to snapping at him like this. He tried to be polite and honorable, as a knight should be. He tried to respect her space and privacy so long as he was still close enough to protect her, should the need arise. He avoided interrupting her studies and experiments with questions, even when he was dying to ask one. She didn't seem to like having him around, so he tried to be as nondescript as possible, silent as a stone. Link understood her plight better now than before, and he did not fault her for wishing to do things like getting away from the castle. He knew the pressure that she was under, and thought that he could relate. She had not yet awoken her sealing powers, regardless of the hours of prayer each day. But what could he do? Knowing that he, the chosen hero, felt as incapable as she was, would only worry her even further, he was sure. The princess paused again, taking a deep breath. When she opened her eyes again, she met Link's. Return to the castle. What? She walked forward, chin held high as she brushed past him. And tell my father that I do not need a babysitter. Please. Link closed his eyes, exhaling slowly, and then opened them again. He began after her, walking back in the direction of the horses. After a few steps, she stopped, and he saw her ball her hands into fists. She took a breath and turned back to him, her cheeks flushed deeply now. Stop following me! Her voice echoed off the columns and walls around them, shrill and full of fury. Link stopped, eyes widening. She had gotten irritated at him before, but this. He opened his mouth, licking his lips. I can't. I gave you an order, knight. Her voice was full of venom now. The fact that he had responded only seemed to have angered her further. "Princess, I am your chosen." "Chosen? Chosen?" She laughed bitterly, taking a step towards him. "I did not choose you. Not as my knight, nor as my champion." She advanced closer, and he felt heat rising up in the back of his neck. "No, the sword did, as did my father, but not me." The princess stopped only a foot from Link, looking up into his eyes, with a look that he could only assume was purest loathing. She reached out, poking him in the chest. "I never asked for you to accompany me. I never asked for you to protect me." She paused, looking at her finger, which pressed against his blue champion's tunic. She pulled it away, dropping her hand back to her side and turned away. "I don't want you to be my knight." She began to walk away again, her steps less determined. Her shoulders slumped, her fury spent. Link said nothing. For what could he say? Anger. Hurt. Confusion. The emotions washed over Link as his mind pulled itself back to the present. He stared at the glowing orange pedestal, trembling slightly, feeling his cheeks growing flushed. Did she truly not know? Did she even care to know? He followed her. He protected her. He had been doing nothing more than his most sacred duty, and she had spat it back at him like it was something vile. After everything that he had done, that was how she treated him? After defeating 2 divine beasts, after being hurt in a dozen different ways, after dying for her, that was what he received from her? No. That's not right. That was before, in the past, before all of this. It was all too much for Link to process. He stepped back from the pedestal, clipping the Sheikah's slate back on his belt. His thoughts warred with themselves, both furious and confused. In that moment, he thought that he hated her. Maybe it would be better if he did just abandon her. Go back to her father and... No! He shook himself, trying to focus. That's not now. It's not... That was over 100 years ago. Link? She hated me. No, she hated me. Does she still now? No, does she? Link, are you all right? He could see her face. Red with anger and full of spite, he could hear her venomous tone as she spat her insults. He could feel the embarrassment and anger washing over him. He could feel the desire to snap back, to tell her just how unpleasant his life had been since being forced into service. He could. He would. He would tell her right now, and no. Link. He felt 2 large hands clasp both of his shoulders and shake him. The image of her shattered, replaced by the view of Kass, his expression deeply troubled. Link, what is it? What did you see? You look... Kass hesitated, and Link could understand why. His fists were clenched so tightly that his nails felt as though they might pierce his palm. His jaw was tightly set, and he felt far too hot in his tunic. Link forced himself to relax his hands and push the memory aside. It was the past. It wasn't now. Gradually, he felt his emotions come back under his control. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking again. His teeth ached from the pressure he'd exerted on them. I'm okay, I must be going mad. It was growing more difficult to separate his memories from his current reality. The emotions he felt in them were all too real. He'd felt it before, with Daruk and Mipha. But it seemed to him that they were only getting stronger. I need a moment. He pulled away from Kass, shaking his head and unfolding his paraglider. Before the Rito could object, Link walked to the edge and leaped off, gliding down into the canyon below, to where Spirit awaited.